Not every woman who withdraws is running away. Some are returning to themselves. And this is where something dangerous, quietly dangerous, begins. Your emotional distance is not emptiness. It is presence without permission. It is the moment you stop leaking your inner world to be chosen, explained, or negotiated. And the moment you do that, something in him destabilizes. Because a man does not lose control when a woman chases him. He loses control when she becomes ungraspable. You feel it when you stop over-explaining. When your replies slow, not out of strategy, but out of alignment. When your energy no longer rushes to reassure, fix, soften, or carry what isn't yours. This is not coldness. This is coherence. And coherence is intoxicating. As Carl Jung said, what you resist persists, but what you integrate transforms. When you stop resisting your own depth, when you no longer dilute it to be digestible, you integrate power. And power does something unsettling to unresolved masculine psyches. He feels pulled, not because you give more, but because you give less access. Your silence begins to speak. Your absence begins to weigh more than your presence ever did. This is where confusion enters him. He can't read you the way he used to. He can't predict you. He can't regulate himself through your emotional availability. And so his nervous system starts reaching. Not consciously, instinctively. In Jung's view, projection occurs when someone encounters an inner force they have not made peace with. Your distance becomes a mirror. And what he sees in that mirror is not you. It is his lack of inner containment. That's why your calm unsettles him. That's why your boundaries feel magnetic. That's why he thinks about you more when you say less. You are no longer feeding his certainty. You are feeding his awareness. And awareness is destabilizing to anyone who relied on control instead of depth. This is the female energy men lose control over. Not loud, not seductive, not performative, but rooted, centered, self-held. You don't disappear. You reclaim. And the moment you do, his emotional balance begins to orbit around you, whether he understands it or not. This is where the pull begins. Here is what most women misunderstand about emotional distance. It is not something you do to a man. It is something that happens when you stop abandoning yourself. When your center returns to you, his center starts to wobble, because he was regulating himself through your responsiveness, through your availability, through your emotional predictability. And now, suddenly, you are still inside your body, still inside your rhythm, still inside your own life. That stillness creates pressure, not on you, on him. A man feels unstable when he cannot locate himself through a woman's reactions, when her mood no longer rises and falls with his effort, when her interest is no longer guaranteed by his presence. This is where desire shifts from comfort to tension. In Jungian psychology, the anima, the inner feminine within a man, activates when control fails, when certainty collapses, when logic no longer explains the pull. Your distance activates his anima, not because you are mysterious on purpose, but because you are contained. Contained women are dangerous to men who rely on reassurance instead of self-mastery. You no longer chase clarity. You allow ambiguity to exist. And ambiguity is unbearable to someone who is emotionally unfinished. He begins to overthink interactions that once felt simple, replays conversations, searches for cues that no longer exist, because your energy stopped leaning toward him. And when feminine energy stops leaning, masculine energy starts reaching. This is the hook. Not attention, not sexuality, not validation, but the quiet awareness that he no longer has access to your inner world by default. Jung said the unconscious is not persuaded by words. It responds to symbols. Your emotional distance becomes a symbol of value, a symbol of choice, a symbol of a woman who does not orbit anyone. And that symbol destabilizes him more than rejection ever could. Rejection gives clarity. Distance gives possibility. And possibility is where obsession is born. He doesn't feel pushed away. He feels uninvited. And uninvited presence makes a man confront a terrifying question. Am I enough to be chosen without being chased? This is why your calm unnerves him, why your boundaries feel erotic, why your absence echoes louder than your voice ever did. You are no longer trying to be held. You are holding yourself. And that is the energy men lose control over, because it reminds them of everything they haven't yet mastered within themselves. What truly hooks him is not your withdrawal. It is what replaces it. Where there used to be explanation, there is now quiet authority. Where there used to be emotional labor, there is now self-possession. And this shift does something subtle but profound to his inner world. He begins to feel off balance. Not because you changed the rules, but because you stopped playing unconsciously. A man senses when a woman no longer needs him to feel whole. And for an unintegrated masculine psyche, this is both magnetic and terrifying. In Jung's view, the masculine ego seeks dominance when it fears dissolution. And your emotional distance dissolves the illusion that he is central to your stability. You are no longer emotionally orbiting him. You are standing. That is why he feels pulled one moment and unsettled the next. Because his desire is now colliding with his insecurity. He wants to approach, but approaching means effort. He wants closeness, but closeness now requires depth. And depth exposes him. Your distance forces him to confront a truth he may have avoided for years. Connection cannot be controlled, only earned. This is why he starts testing, sending messages without substance, watching your reactions, or the lack of them, trying to re-establish the old emotional rhythm. But it no longer works. Because your nervous system has shifted. You are not cold. You are regulated. And a regulated woman disrupts the emotional economy of a man who relied on inconsistency. Jung said that when the unconscious is challenged, it responds with fixation. Your emotional neutrality becomes a psychological challenge. He doesn't know where he stands anymore. And uncertainty creates attachment when the ego lacks grounding. So he thinks of you when he shouldn't. Feels the urge to reach out without knowing why. Misses your presence more intensely now that it is not guaranteed. Not because you withdrew love, but because you withdrew access. You did not punish. You clarified. And clarity is devastating to anyone who thrived on ambiguity. This is the deeper reason your distance hooks him. It reveals that intimacy with you is no longer passive. It requires presence, consistency, inner maturity. And whether he rises or retreats, your energy remains intact, because the woman who holds herself no longer needs to hold anyone else together. And that is why he feels pulled, unstable, and undone, not by your silence, but by your wholeness. What happens next is something few women are taught to recognize. When your emotional distance stabilizes, his emotions begin to spike. He becomes more reactive, not outwardly dramatic, but internally restless. Small shifts in your tone register deeply. A delayed response feels heavier than an argument ever did. Why? Because he is no longer anchored in your availability. In Jung's psychology, when a man has not integrated his inner feminine, his anima, he seeks it externally. He looks for a woman to contain his emotional flow, to soften uncertainty, to make life feel navigable. You used to do that unconsciously. Now you don't. And without that containment, his psyche searches for equilibrium. This is where the feeling of being hooked begins, not romantically, but neurologically. His system is trying to restore balance. He starts checking, not because he wants control, but because he lost it. Your neutrality removes the emotional feedback he depended on to feel secure. And here is the paradox. The less you try to affect him, the more affected he becomes. Because your energy no longer reaches outward. It folds inward. This inward turn is ancient feminine power. It is not seduction. It is not strategy. It is self-reference. A woman who references herself becomes an emotional gravity field. He begins to feel pulled without invitation, destabilized without confrontation, engaged without access. And this creates internal tension. His desire increases, but so does his fear. Because desire now requires accountability. Your distance says without words, I am not here to regulate you. And for many men, that is the first time intimacy has ever felt real. Jung wrote that transformation begins where comfort ends. Your emotional distance removes comfort, but not connection. You are still warm, still present, still alive, but no longer porous. And that boundary forces a reckoning. He can no longer stay passive. He must either step forward consciously or collapse back into avoidance. This is why some men become more attentive, more intentional, more grounded, and others vanish. Not because you became distant, but because you became clear. And clarity is unbearable to a psyche that survives on emotional diffusion. You are no longer a place to rest without effort. You are a presence that requires evolution. And that is why he feels unstable. Because your energy is no longer available to absorb what he refuses to face within himself. There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when he realizes something has shifted permanently. You are no longer emotionally reachable in the old way. Not because you closed your heart, but because you stopped leaving it unguarded. This is where his sense of control truly dissolves. Control was never about dominance. It was about predictability. About knowing that if he pulled away, you would lean in. If he hesitated, you would reassure. If he offered less, you would compensate. But now, nothing rushes toward him, and that absence of pursuit creates inner pressure. In Jung's terms, the ego panics when it can no longer outsource regulation. Your distance removes the external anchor he unconsciously relied on. So his psyche turns inward. This is deeply uncomfortable. He begins questioning himself, his value, his position in your life, his emotional impact, or lack of it. This is why he feels unstable. Because for the first time, the relationship is no longer happening around him. It is happening within him. Your energy has become self-contained. You no longer react immediately. You no longer overfunction emotionally. You no longer fill the silence with meaning. And silence becomes loud. Not because it is manipulative, but because it exposes everything that was hidden by noise. Jung said that what is unconscious seeks expression through tension. Your emotional distance creates that tension, and tension awakens desire far more powerfully than reassurance ever could. This is the mistake many women make. They think desire comes from giving more, but desire comes from space. Space forces imagination. Space activates longing. Space removes certainty, and certainty is the enemy of depth. He feels pulled because your energy no longer explains itself. He feels hooked because your presence is no longer guaranteed. He feels destabilized because his old emotional strategies fail. And through this discomfort, something rare can happen. He can grow, or he can retreat. But either way, you remain intact. Because this form of feminine energy is not about outcome. It is about alignment. You are no longer positioning yourself to be chosen. You are positioned within yourself. And that is why his nervous system cannot relax around you anymore. Not because you are distant, but because you are rooted. Rooted women do not chase. They do not plead. They do not collapse to be held. They become the ground. And anyone who wants closeness must learn how to stand. At this stage, something subtle but irreversible happens inside him. He stops feeling entitled to you. And entitlement was the hidden structure holding his emotional balance together. When you were always emotionally available, he didn't have to risk anything. Your presence felt renewable. Your forgiveness felt endless. Your depth felt safe to touch without consequence. But now, there is consequence. Not punishment. Not distance as a tactic. But weight. Your energy has weight now. In Jung's terms, weight appears when the psyche encounters something real, something that cannot be bypassed or consumed unconsciously. You are no longer symbolic comfort. You are reality, and reality demands response. This is where his inner conflict intensifies. He wants to reach out, but reaching out now exposes intention. He wants reassurance, but asking reveals need. He wants closeness, but closeness now requires vulnerability. So he hovers. He watches. He waits. He tests the edge of your presence without stepping fully into it. And that hovering is not indifference. It is fear meeting desire. Your emotional distance forces him to feel something he avoided for a long time. Emotional responsibility. You are no longer absorbing his uncertainty. You are no longer translating his confusion into comfort. You are no longer making it easy for him to stay undefined. And undefined men panic in the presence of defined women. Because definition removes fantasy. It reveals truth. Your calm exposes the gap between who he is and who he would need to become to stand beside you. This is why he feels unstable. Because your energy no longer adjusts to his level. It invites him upward or leaves him behind. Jung said that the encounter with the self is often experienced as loss before it is experienced as liberation. You represent that encounter, not because you demand anything, but because you no longer negotiate your worth through proximity. You don't ask where you stand. You stand where you are. And from that place, something powerful happens. You stop waiting for him to choose. You stop monitoring his behavior. You stop emotionally bracing for inconsistency. Your nervous system exits survival mode. And when a woman leaves survival mode, men who thrived on her vigilance lose their footing, because she is no longer watching for collapse. She is living. And that freedom, quiet, embodied, non-performative, is what makes him feel pulled, undone, and strangely exposed. Not by what you do, but by who you have become. Now comes the most misunderstood phase, when you feel nothing dramatic, but everything has already changed. You are calm, not numb, not detached, calm. And this calm unsettles him more than passion ever did. Because passion can be negotiated. Calm cannot. Your emotional distance has matured into inner sovereignty. You are no longer scanning his behavior for meaning. You are no longer interpreting silence as threat or interest. You are simply present with yourself. And in Jungian terms, this is the moment the self replaces the ego. When a woman stops relating from need and begins relating from wholeness, she exits the archetype of the giver and enters the archetype of the integrated feminine. This is where men truly lose control, not because you disappear, but because you are no longer hooked by their uncertainty. He senses it immediately. Your energy no longer tightens when he pulls away. Your mood no longer lifts when he gives crumbs of attention. Your identity no longer reorganizes around his choices. And that creates a vacuum. Not an empty one, but a truthful one. Jung said that nature abhors a vacuum, and the psyche will rush to fill it. So he begins to feel everything he once outsourced to you. Loneliness, desire, regret, curiosity, fear of loss. You are no longer buffering his inner world. And without that buffer, he must face himself. This is when he starts questioning past behavior, reevaluating moments he took for granted, feeling the weight of your absence even when you are still there. Because your presence has changed texture. It is no longer soothing. It is revealing. You are not punishing him. You are not withdrawing affection. You are simply no longer available for unconscious relating. And unconscious men feel exposed around conscious women. That is why some suddenly try to anchor you again, with attention, promises, intensity, and others fade quietly, unable to tolerate the mirror you have become. But here is the truth you must hold. His reaction is no longer your responsibility. Your work is not to regulate his emotions. Your work is not to soften your power so it feels safe. Your work is to stay aligned, because alignment creates a frequency that cannot be faked. And when a woman holds that frequency, she no longer wonders why he feels pulled, unstable, or hooked. She understands. He is not reacting to her distance. He is reacting to her return to herself. And once that return happens, nothing and no one can pull her back out of her center. What you may not realize yet is this. Your emotional distance has done something irreversible to the dynamic. You have shifted the axis of power. Before, the connection moved toward him. Your attention, your care, your effort. Now, the movement has stopped. And when movement stops, truth appears. He can feel it in his body. in the way he hesitates before reaching out, in the way he replays moments, searching for the version of you that no longer exists. Because the woman who once bridged emotional gaps is gone, and in her place stands someone unfamiliar, even to herself. You are not performing femininity anymore. You are inhabiting it. In Jung's view, when an archetype is lived unconsciously, it becomes fate. When it is lived consciously, it becomes power. You have moved from unconscious giving to conscious being. And that is why his emotions feel erratic now. One moment he feels drawn, the next intimidated, then nostalgic, then restless. Because your energy no longer stabilizes him, it reveals him. Your distance has stripped away the illusion that love is something he can access without consequence. Now, if he wants closeness, he must show up whole. If he wants intimacy, he must risk exposure. If he wants you, he must meet you. And meeting you requires something many men have never practiced: presence without control. This is why he feels hooked. Not because you are withholding, but because you are no longer compensating. You no longer fill emotional gaps. You allow them to exist. And gaps demand growth or collapse. Here is the part few women are prepared for. Your power no longer depends on his reaction, whether he steps forward or fades away. Your nervous system remains steady. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are witnessing. And witnessing is a higher position than hoping. This is where the feminine becomes uncontainable. Not loud, not dramatic, but sovereign. You begin to sense that his instability is not a problem to solve. It is information. Information about his capacity, his maturity, his readiness. And you don't rush to interpret it. You let it show itself. Because when a woman stops trying to secure love, love finally has to reveal its truth. And at this stage, something sacred happens. You stop asking, why does he feel this way? And start knowing, I am no longer available for anything less. That knowing changes everything. Not just how he sees you, but how you see yourself. And once that perception shifts, there is no returning to the woman who needed closeness to feel complete. You are already complete, and anyone who approaches you now must do so with intention, integrity, and depth. At this point, the dynamic no longer belongs to the past version of you. Something has crystallized. You no longer feel the urge to explain your distance. You no longer feel guilt for not reaching out. You no longer feel responsible for what unfolds inside him. And this is the final fracture of control. Because the last illusion a man holds onto is this: that a woman's depth will always bend toward connection. But yours doesn't bend anymore. It stands. In Jung's language, this is individuation. The moment a woman stops relating from fragments and begins relating from the self. And when a man encounters a woman who is individuated, he does not feel powerful. He feels measured. Your energy no longer rushes to meet his uncertainty. It waits, not passively, not anxiously, but attentively. And that waiting is unbearable to someone who relied on immediacy to feel secure. He senses that you are no longer emotionally persuadable, no longer responsive to potential, no longer moved by half steps. You are responsive only to reality, and reality exposes. This is why his attempts, if they come, feel different now. More careful, more intentional, or more avoidant. Because he knows something instinctively. He cannot return to the old version of you. And that loss destabilizes him more than rejection ever could. You didn't close the door. You changed the room. Your emotional distance has become an internal boundary so firm that even you no longer negotiate it. You don't harden. You don't withdraw love. You simply stop making space for what cannot meet you. And this is the deepest feminine power of all. Not allure, not mystery, not seduction, but self-loyalty. Jung said that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent. And the greatest liberation a woman experiences is when she stops living her emotional life for someone else. You are no longer carrying his confusion. You are no longer holding the relationship together with hope. You are no longer softening truth to preserve connection. And that is why he feels hooked. Because your energy no longer asks for him. It chooses or it doesn't. And for the first time, the power dynamic is not reversed. It is neutralized. You are not above him. You are not beneath him. You are with yourself. And from that place, only one kind of connection survives. The one that can stand in truth without being carried. Everything else dissolves. Quietly, naturally, without drama. Because you are no longer a woman who waits to be held. You are a woman who is already whole. This is where the story closes. Not with intensity, not with drama, but with truth. You arrive at a place inside yourself where you no longer ask what he feels. Because you finally understand what you feel. And what you feel is solid. Your emotional distance is no longer a phase. It is a position. A position rooted in self-respect, inner calm, and discernment. This is why the pull he feels no longer defines you. It exists, but it does not direct you. In Jung's view, the completion of individuation is marked by one clear sign. You stop seeking yourself in another. And that is exactly what has happened. You are no longer searching for confirmation in his desire. You are no longer measuring your worth through his reactions. You are no longer waiting for clarity to come from outside. Clarity lives in you now. And this inner clarity does something profound. It ends the chase entirely. Not because you gave up, but because there is nothing left to pursue. You have returned to your axis. If he steps forward from this place, he does so differently. With intention, with presence, with awareness. And if he does not, you do not collapse, question, or grieve the way you once did. Because you are no longer losing anything. You gained yourself. This is the feminine energy men lose control over because it cannot be negotiated, manipulated, or delayed into submission. It is not reactive. It is not dependent. It is not waiting. It simply is. And that presence, quiet, grounded, embodied, changes the emotional rules entirely. You don't inspire obsession anymore. You inspire reckoning. You don't trigger pursuit. You trigger growth or retreat. And both outcomes are clean. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You have claimed that privilege. So now, you move forward differently. Not guarded, not hardened, but sovereign. You love without losing yourself. You connect without dissolving. You choose without chasing. And the men who feel pulled, unstable, and undone by this energy, they are not reacting to distance. They are reacting to a woman who no longer needs to be held in order to stand. And this is where your power settles, not as something you use, but as something you live, quietly, fully, unapologetically.